Let's look into more detail on how to start with the configuration of Vlabs. The first LAD, implementing a small network. Implementing a small network involves several steps, from planning and design to configuration and testing. Here's a general guide to get you started. 1. Planning the network TE. Identify requirements. Determine the number of devices, computers, printers, etc. Decide on the types of applications that will run, e.g., file sharing, web services. Consider future expansion. B. Select network type wired, Ethernet, or wireless, Wi-Fi. Choose based on mobility needs, cost, and speed requirements. 2. Designing the network A, topologies. Star, most common. All devices connect to a central hub switch. Mesh, more resilient. Each device connects to multiple others. Bus, less common. All devices share a single communication line. B. IP addressing. Decide between static or dynamic. DHCP. IP addressing. Plan an IP address range, e.g., 192.168.1.0/24. 3. Selecting hardware. A network devices router. Connects the network to the internet. Switch connects devices within the network. Access point, if using Wi-Fi, extends the wireless network. B. Cables Ethernet cables, Cat5e, Cat6. For wired connections. Consider cable management solutions. 4. Setting up the network. A. Physical installation. Install and connect the router, switch, and access points. Run Ethernet cables to each device as needed. B. Configuration router. Setup. Access the router's admin interface and configure WAN settings, LAN settings, subnet DHCP, and wireless settings, SSID security. Switch configuration. Generally plug and play, but managed switches allow for VLANs and traffic management. Device configuration. Assign IPs.
So let's look at the actual topology, starting with Vlab 1. In the beginning, you want to get your equipment ready and prepared for the initial load of configuration. R1 enable R1 vol erase startup config, R1 vol result. When prompted to confirm, press enter. Explanation. The router already has a baseline configuration. You are erasing it so that you can configure one from scratch. Anytime you see a device blinking, it is a reminder to console into a new device. System configuration has been modified. Save. Yes. No. No. Proceed with reload. Confirm. Step 2. Reload R1. Action. R1 number sign reload. ChatGPT said. ChatGPT. Sure. It looks like you're preparing to configure a router R1 from scratch by erasing its startup configuration and then reloading it. Here's a continuation of your process. Step 3. Verify the router is ready. After reloading, you'll want to check the router status and ensure it has no configuration loaded. Plaintext R1 greater than enable R1 number sign. Show running config. Expected output. You should see a message indicating that there's no configuration, or it may show a default configuration. Step 4. Start basic configuration. Now you can begin setting up the basic configuration for the router. Here are some initial commands you might use. Plaintext R1 row configure terminal R1 config, all hostname R1 config, no IP domain lookup. Explanation. Hostname R1 sets the router's hostname to R1. No IP domain lookup prevents the router from attempting to resolve mistyped commands as hostnames. Step 5. Configure interfaces. You might want to configure the interfaces next. Here's an example of configuring an interface. Plaintext R1 config interface gigabit Ethernet 0/0R1 config if IP address 192.168.1.12555.255.255.0R1 config if no shutdown. Step 6. Save the configuration. Once you've completed your configuration, it's important to save it so it remains after a reload. Plaintext R1 copy running config startup config. Expected output. You'll see a prompt asking if you want to overwrite the startup configuration. Press Enter to confirm. Conclusion: you now have a basic configuration on R1. You can continue adding more configurations as needed, such as routing protocols, access lists, or security settings. Let me know if you need further details or specific configurations.